You mentioned Karl Marx as one of the great intellects, economic thinkers ever.
Yeah.
He might be number one. You study him quite a bit. You disagree with him quite a bit.
Yep.
But you still think he's a powerful thinker.
Powerful mind. Yeah.
A powerful mind. So first of all, let's just explore the human. Why do you say so? What's interesting in that mind, in the way he saw the world? What are the insights that you find brilliant?
Marx once described his major work as towards a critical examination of everything existing. Okay. So he's a modest bastard.
Yeah.
So he wanted to understand and criticize everything.
Yeah.
And even he wasn't trained directly by Hegel, but his teachers were Hegelian philosophers. And what Hegel developed was a concept called dialectics. And dialectics is a philosophy of change. And when most people hear the word dialectics, they come up with this unpronounceable trio of words called thesis, antithesis, synthesis. I can barely get the words out myself.
Yep.
And that actually is not Hegel at all. That's another German philosopher called Fichte.
Oh,
Fichte.
I thought it was Kant.
No, Fichte. Well, I'm not sure.
I mix them up. All Germans look the same to me.
Yeah. But if you look, there's a beautiful book called Marx and Contradiction. You want to find a great explanation for Marx's philosophy. I've forgotten the author. I think it's Wilde, Wilde, Marx and Contradiction. And he points out the actual origins of Marx's philosophy. Well, I didn't know that when I first read Marx. So I became exposed to Marx when I was a student at Sydney University, and we'd had a strike at the university over the teaching of philosophy. And what happened was the philosophy department had a lot of radical philosophers in it and a conservative chief philosopher. And the radicals wanted to have a course on what they called philosophical aspects of feminist thought. Mm-hmm. And the staff voted in favor of it. This is back in the days when university departments were democratic. The professor opposed it. He got it blocked at a high level. The staff leapfrogged over that. And then finally the vice chancellor blocked it. So that led to a strike over the teaching of philosophy at Sydney University, which at one stage over half the students were on strike. Okay.
Wow.
Economics began out of that.
Over teaching of a philosophy of feminism.
Yes.
God, it's good to be.
That's such a different life to what we're living now. But that's the academic milieu in which I developed all my ideas. And I had become a critic. I've gone from being a believer of mainstream economics when I was a first-year student to disbelieving it halfway through first year. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I then spent a long time trying to change it, getting nowhere. And then this philosophy strike happened, and we took it on in economics, and we formed what's called the political economy movement, and had a successful strike. We actually managed to pressure the university into establishing a department of political economy at Sydney University, as well as a department of economics.
What was the foundational ideas? Were you resistant to the whole censorship of why can't you have a philosophy of anything kind of course?
Well, it was much more libertarian in the genuine sense of the word period of time at the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s. Then the word libertarian has been corrupted since then. But it really was about free thought. And you went to university to learn. It was about education. I remember having a fight with my father once where Dad was angry about the marks I was getting for some of my courses. And he said, if you don't get a decent result, you won't get a decent job. And I said, I'm not here to get a job. I'm here to get an education.
Oh, wow.
Okay, now the thing is, ultimately, it's been a pretty good job for me as well. This is in Sydney, by the way. And Sydney in summer is absolutely gorgeous. And what us bunch of lefties decide to do during summer but read Karl Marx.
Yeah, okay. On the beach or?
Actually, inside the room of the philosophy department at the University of Sydney in the main quadrangle. So there's sandstone all around us, and we bunch of about 20 or 30 of us reading our way through Marx.
Capital, like which?
Volume 1 Capital. And I remember walking off to that meeting with one of my friends who's a law student, and this was a period of a huge construction boom in Sydney. So the whole skyline, which we could see from the campus, was full of what they call kangaroo cranes, which were an Australian invention, that are cranes that can be leapfrogged over each other to build a skyscraper.
So here you are reading Karl Marx, looking at the mechanisms of capitalism.
And I looked at those mechanisms, and I knew Marx argued that labour was the only source of value.
Yeah.
And he said machinery doesn't add value.
So the cranes are worthless.
I'm looking at these cranes and thinking, I want a very good explanation by Marx as to why these cranes don't add value. So reading through the first 7 chapters of Capital, what you found was Marx applying this dialectic. And like the Fichtean stuff is bullshit. That is not how Marx thought at all. I was reading, trying to find the thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and it's not there at all in any of Marx's works. And I've read everything he's ever written on economics from 1844 to 1894 when his last books were published. There's not one word of mention of that. What he does talk about is foreground and background and tension. And his idea of a dialectic is that there is a unity will exist in society. And that unity can be an individual, it can be a commodity, anything at all. The unity will be understood by that society. One particular aspect will be focused upon. So if you think about the human being in capitalism, the focus on the human being as an object is their capacity to work. You're a worker, okay? That bit's put in the foreground. The fact that you're human and you want to play a guitar and go surfing and make love and all the other things that humans do is pushed into the background. So there's a tension between the two of those. And that can transform that unity over time. And that's a beautiful dynamic vision of change. So dialectics is a philosophy of change.
So synthesis, antithesis is what? Does every idea have a counter argument?
Yeah. There's a positive and negative, and you bring them together somehow.
And then Marx has this foreground, background,
and tension.
And foreground is all what we think of as economics, and background is all the lovemaking that we do as humans.
That sort of thing.
And why is there a tension?
Well, it's because if you mention the unity, like if you take a human in any previous, like to go back to Cro-Magnon days when we're living in caves and we've got to go hunting and cook food and stuff like that, but there's no social hierarchy as we've become used to. Yeah. So you don't get laboured as a worker or a capitalist. You're just a human in that situation. Then you've got more of an integrated view of who you are. And I think that's one of the appeals of a genuine tribal culture, that you get treated for the whole of who you are. You've certainly categorized, you're male, you're female, you're young, you're old, you're a hunter, you're a tool maker, et cetera, but you're treated as more an integrated object. When you get put in a complex society like a capitalist society, then one side of you is emphasized and the others are de-emphasized.
So is it fair to say that the background is like our basic fundamental humanity, and then the foreground is the machine of capitalism?
Effectively, and when you look at it in terms of a human. But what Marx did is apply this to a commodity. So he said, what is the essential unity in a capitalist economy? And the essential unity is a commodity. Okay, that's
the essential unit.
The essential unity.
What's unity?
Unity is an object in society. Okay. So he started from the point of view of trying to understand how exchange occurs. How do we set prices? And his starting vision was to say that a commodity is a unity in a capitalist economy. The part of the unity that we focus upon is its exchange value. A capitalist produces a commodity not because of its qualitative characteristics, but because it be sold for a profit. So the foreground aspect of a commodity is its exchange value. The background aspect of it won't succeed as a commodity unless it has a use value.
So the background is the utility thing.
Yeah. So if you made something which didn't work, okay, then you might be able to sell it, but it has no utility. You can't make that into a commodity. A broken thing can't be sold.
Does that have the subjective?
Yeah, it has to have the subjective side.
So people enjoy
as well as the objective. So the objective is what capitalists worry about. I'll give you my favorite counterexample of that. I took a bunch of Australian journalists to China way back in the period when the Gang of Four was being on trial. And we did a tour of the Forbidden City in Beijing. And at that stage, all the artifacts of the royal family, the emperor, were actually in the building still. And we walked past one of them, and it was this solid gold bar about this long, shaped like a fist, turned over like this. And on this side, there were rubies, emeralds, diamonds. You'd never seen gemstones. I mean, gems that big, okay? And one of the journalists asked me what I thought it was, and I said, it's obvious, Jane, it's a back scratcher. Ha, ha, ha.
Mm-hmm.
I walked away. She caught up with me about 20 minutes later. Said, I asked one of the guides, it is a back scratcher.
Wow.
So here's a back scratcher for the emperor made of solid gold with diamonds and rubies and emeralds doing the scratching.
Yeah.
Now that's a commodity in a feudal society. Okay, the cost doesn't matter. You want the most elaborate, beautiful thing because you're the emperor. So that in a feudal society, the commodity, what's focused upon is the utility, and the cost of production when you're the emperor is immaterial. Capitalism reverses that.
Mm-hmm.
So the commodity in a capitalist economy is a plastic $2 scratcher you can get from Kmart or Target.
Yeah.
And so the use value is necessary, but irrelevant to forming the price. Now, that was a completely different vision of exchange in capitalism to what I found in the neoclassical theory, because that says it's the marginal utility and the marginal cost of everything that determines the exchange ratio. And the crazy thing about that is not so much the marginal utility, but the argument in the neoclassical theory is that the price ratio, the price will, when there's an exchange going on, there's two-person, two-commodity exchange of two commodities between two people, they will the price will change until such time as the ratio of the marginal utilities is equal to the ratio of the marginal costs.
Right.
That's supposed to be the equilibrium. And Marx says that's bullshit. That's a previous society where you exchange stuff that you happen to have for stuff somebody else happened to have without any real production mechanism being involved. And he said that's like when you have two tribes meeting for the very first time, and one tribe can make something the other tribe can't make. And they will therefore, the price they were willing to pay will reflect how unique this other object is that this one tribe can make and the other can't. So, for example, the story of Manhattan being sold for 40 glass beads.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually 40 glass trading beads. I believe it is a true story. But the thing is, the Indians couldn't make glass beads. So they valued the glass beads at the island of Manhattan,
Mm-hmm.
okay, which is a utility-based comparison. What Marx said, that's the very initial contact. Over time, even if you don't know the technology, over time you start to realize how much work goes involved to making what they're selling you versus what you're selling to them. And you start making stuff specifically for sale.
Mm-hmm.
So, Elon's not losing personal utility each time a Model 3 goes out the door. He get utility out of the fact that he's created that vehicle, that concept, and manufactures it and so on, but he's not losing utility each time a Model T Ford goes out the door, for going back for the ancient commodity there. So the utility plays no role in setting price in Marx's model, whereas it's essential in the neoclassical model.
What's the difference between utility and marginal utility? What does the word marginal mean, and why is it such a problem?
It turns marginal utility, well, the utility itself has different meanings in the two schools of thought. If you take the classical school of thought, which when Marx comes from, utility is effectively objective. So the utility of a chair is that you can sit in it, okay? Not how comfortable it makes you feel.
Yeah.
Okay, now if you think about the utility of the chairs we're both sitting in, they're identical from a classical point of view. We're both sitting, okay?
Yep.
But from a neoclassical point of view, it's how comfortable it makes you feel. And that depends upon your subjective feelings of comfort. You might be far more comfortable in the identical chair that I'm sitting in than I am.
Yeah.
And therefore the comparison is difficult. And therefore working out a ratio involves you've got to decline each time you give away a chair in exchange for an iPhone, you have a fall in your utility, okay? But and then therefore you want a higher return because you're losing more utility each time. The more chairs you give away, the less utility you're getting from chairs. So there's a decline in your utility. That's your marginal utility. So it's including your subjective valuation in setting the price. And what Marx pointed out is this is a caricature of actual change in a capitalist economy, because we have in a capitalist economy huge factories turning out huge quantities specifically for sale. They've got no utility to the seller unless they're sold.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's a very different vision of how price is set, and Marx used that to explain where profit comes from, but he made a mistake. And his argument was that talking about a worker. As now your unity, this foreground, background tension thing. The foreground is that you hire a worker for their cost of production. And the cost of production is a subsistence wage. Okay. The utility to the buyer is the fact that they can work in a factory. Now, it might take 6 hours, let's say, to make the means of subsistence. And that's the exchange value, and that's what the capitalist pays as a wage to the worker. But they can work in the factory for 12 hours. That's the utility. 12 minus 6 is 6 surplus of value hours, and that's where profit comes from. And that was Marx's argument. And I thought it was brilliant, but it also applied to machinery.
Right. Okay. Let's linger on that. Hold on a second. No. Deep is good. You just want to define terms. Don't take that statement out of context. The internet, please. Okay. You said buyer, seller, worker in a factory. Who's the seller? Who's the buyer?
Well, you look.
Why is the worker the buyer?
Well, the worker's the commodity in this case, because if you're going to make stuff in a factory, you've got to hire workers.
Yes.
Okay. And what Marx is saying, the buyer in that situation is a capitalist. So what does the buyer pay? He says he pays the exchange value. That's back to the commodity thing. That's just because that's the starting point. He said the essential unity in a capitalist economy is the commodity. A commodity has two characteristics: exchange value and use value. Okay. Exchange value of a commodity in a capitalist economy will be its cost of production. The use value is what you do with it. Okay, once you purchased it.
But labor is a commodity?
In this case, when a worker is being hired for a job, yes.
So the worker's labor has an exchange value and a use value as well?
Yeah.
Use value. Use value of a worker's labor. Exchange value. Let me think about that. So so the hours they put in
is the use value.
Interesting. So what does the worker want in this? What are the motivations? Are we not considering the worker in this context as a human being with wants and needs?
And that's actually that's the next layer. What Marx gives us is like a layered cake, starting from a foundation of saying straight commodity exchange, and then saying, well, you're treating a worker as a commodity. Now, a commodity is something, like this. Okay, that has, so far as I'm aware, no soul. Okay, not going to be complaining if I turn it upside down; it'll fall over. But so there's no soul there. Whereas a human is both a commodity and a non-commodity.
Yeah,
and therefore there'll be a tension in the person. I'm being treated as a commodity here. I'm being paid just enough to stay alive. I've got a wife and kids back at home.
Yeah.
So that is another layer of thinking in Marx, and on that layer he then says, well, workers will therefore demand more than their value.
So that's when you get like political. Marx.
You get political and you get money coming above that and so on. But the basic idea starts from the commodity is the fundamental unity in capitalism. The important commodity in Marx's thinking was the worker, because that's where he said profit came from.
Yeah.
Okay. And then that explains the motivation of the capitalist, and that ultimately leads to the labor theory of value and Marx's arguments about how capitalism will come to an end.